Welcome to Construction Genius. My name is Eric Anderton. My guest today is Andrew Knightlick, the director of the Center for Executive Coaching. Andrew and I have known each other for many years. I consider him a personal mentor, and we have a terrific conversation about how to lead in crisis, through crisis, and how to prepare your company for the next crisis. We recorded this interview on April 2nd, 2020, in the midst of the coronavirus crisis. So a lot of the discussion is based around that, but what you're going to find are deep insights in this conversation into how you can be a more effective leader of your construction company. As you drive around listening to it, I think you'll find it so helpful that you'll want to come back to your organization and listen to this episode with your executive team. Take notes and think about how you can use and apply what you learn. It's that insightful, it's that important, it's that practical. So feel free to share this with others. Please give us a rating or a review wherever you get your podcasts. Make it a 5-star review if you think we've earned it. And feel free to share this with other construction company professionals that you know. I know that you will find this interview extremely helpful. So thanks for listening to the show and enjoy my chat with Andrew. This is Eric Anderton, and you're listening to Construction Genius, a leadership masterclass. Thomas Edison said that genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. If you're a construction leader, you know all about the perspiration, and this show is all about the 1% inspiration that you can add to your hard work to help you to improve your leadership. Andrew, welcome to the show. It's great to have you with us here today.
Thanks, Eric.
You know, it's interesting. We're recording this. We're April 2nd, so we got past April Fool's Day, but April 2nd, 2020. And obviously the coronavirus crisis is affecting the entire economy. Why is it, do you think, that people have been perhaps unprepared for this, even though obviously we didn't see it coming? Why is it that businesses struggle when these kind of crisis comes upon them?
You know, what we have here is a black swan event. I love Nassim Taleb's writings, Black Swan, Anti-Fragile. He gives a great metaphor of, in a way, we're all like turkeys well before Thanksgiving, right? We're happy. We're being fattened up. We think everything's great. We don't imagine that something like is befalling us now is ever going to hit. And then what happens? November 23rd, November 24th in the USA, all the turkeys get slaughtered. And that's generally the way markets work. That's generally the way economies work. Things like this happen every 10 years or so. These days, it seems, if not sooner. And our human minds just don't think that way. We're not expecting things that come out of the blue like this to happen. And as a result, we haven't built our businesses to be able to withstand these things and be able to be less fragile than they often are.
So you've been working with executives from a variety of different companies for about 20 years now plus. What do you do in your role as a coach and as an executive advisor to help executives in companies prepare for these black swans, to kind of get out of that natural human instinct that things are just going to go awesome for the rest of my life kind of thing?
Most companies don't even think about things in those terms. When they do, it's more like the following. It's more like, I've spent my whole life building this business and it's dependent on me. I'm not going to be, I just don't see how I'm going to tap into the wealth. It's not ready to hand off to my kids. It's not ready to be sold. If God forbid something happened to me and I was out for a month or two, I'm not sure I have the right team in place. If something really happened to me, I don't even know if someone could pick up the documents necessary to keep the business going, especially in my family. And so a lot of the work is about looking at the owner or the chief executive and looking at everything they do and saying, how much of this is really about building the business versus not. So that's one. And the second gets to the business model and the cash flow, right? The companies that are going to survive today were smart enough to build a cushion, not be in too much debt, because that's where this whole system is going to unravel, and think about things that way. Just to give an example of the strongest contractor firm that I know in my area, he's built a multi-million dollar business doing things that most contractors don't do. He owns all of his own equipment. He doesn't bid on jobs that are too big. So he has, basically no debt. He's found a great middle market approach. It's not about ego. It's about making sure that jobs are profitable. And, he's going to be fine through this. That's a lot of what it takes.
So let's talk about that a little bit because it's interesting. I know construction is in some ways, construction can be a very much an ego-driven game. And though right now we're in the midst of this crisis, by the time someone's listening to this, maybe we've come out of it to some degree or another, and eventually another crisis will come. So why don't you explore that a little bit about the ego piece and the building of the business? How did those two things kind of work together a little bit?
Let me lay out a quick framework, right? You've seen this triangle: ego, results, and relationships. And, in any business, there's a balance of all three. You got to build relationships with customers, employees, the community. You have to get results, obviously. And of course, we all have ego, right? We wouldn't be business owners if we didn't have ego. When any of these gets too out of balance, the leader's not as good a leader as they can be, and the business isn't as strong as it can be, right? If it's too much about me getting credit, me winning that giant deal, that when it's over, how do we staff people? That's all ego. And if we take that to an extreme, we could fall apart. If we're all about results to the detriment of building relationships, then yeah, we can get things done once or twice, but nobody wants to work with us after a while. And if it's all about relationships, we maybe avoid what needs to be said. We don't get results. I doubt many people in the construction industry have that problem, but in other businesses, that's an issue. So it's really about a leader finding the balance among all three. And then the other piece of ego is getting out of the way. So it's not so much about you and people remembering you. It's about having a company, the organization that's strong. That's your legacy.
So that's interesting. So on the one hand, you've got that idea of the ego relationship and results, and then on the other, you touched upon the way that you structure the business, specifically with the contractor. You mentioned owning all of their equipment, keeping low debt. What are some other things that you've seen over the years that really work in terms of maximizing cash flow in a business?
Well, one thing is you have to have a clear sense of the business model, right? There's a revenue model, a profit model, and a cash flow model. I found that a lot of owners it's like driving a car with the rear view mirror in two ways. One, they're looking behind them all the time. And two, of course, the rear view mirror doesn't turn the wheels. We got to get the hands on the steering wheel. So that means knowing what precisely drives revenue. What's the model in terms of the size of the average engagement, how long a client stays with you or a customer stays with you. And then that connects to the profit model as well, making sure every job is profitable. And then the cash flow model is all about making sure the business isn't going to have a heart attack. And, I think what the smart businesses do is they consider different scenarios. I think a lot of us got complacent. We only considered one scenario, that's that the turkey never gets slaughtered and keeps getting fatter and fatter. And now we're in a position where those businesses that thought more conservatively did the right thing. So, part of it is probably having the leadership team, a board of advisors, a board of directors that sits down and says, what are the different possibilities in the coming year? And, are we ready for all of them? The same way that the U.S. does a stress test on banks to say, let's say this happens. Can this bank withstand it? I don't think any businesses outside of banking really do that, other than, maybe some big oil companies I know do. But that's a great exercise to go through.
Let's talk about that then, because it's funny. I have the same perspective that you do, that many times the entrepreneurial construction company owners, they get a little bit too optimistic. They get forgetful. What are some good frameworks that you might have that would be effective for scenario planning? What have you found to work over the years?
The company that is known for doing this is Shell Oil. And what they would do, and what I recommend doing, is just pick the dimensions. Let's take the virus now, right? I mean, it's not hard to pick a couple of scenarios here, is right. One might be time and one might be extent. Like, how bad does this thing get? So we could have something that's short-term, extremely intense, or short-term, not too intense. We could have something that's long-term, really intense, long-term, where they flatten the curve and, maybe it's bad, but not as bad as everyone thought. Well, that gives you 4 boxes there. And of course we could do, medium term. You could go as far as you want with this. Well, in each of those, we could say, so let's put some numbers to it. Let's say it's 2 months. We're going to fall. We're going to see our business drop 20%. Are we ready for that? What's it mean? What if it drops 30%? Are we ready? And that's really the exercise. It's a great exercise to do. It goes well with strategic and business planning. And it's something that I think every owner can benefit from. Unfortunately for some of your listeners, the sad news is it might be too late right now. That's why we're talking about how to prepare once we get through this for the next crisis to really strengthen the organization.
Yeah, so that's really good there. So from what you were saying, you've got this idea of a time aspect. you've got this idea of the intensity aspect, and then within the idea of time and intensity, you run the numbers, you run the different scenarios, and you go through the what if planning to decide what you would do once you hit those levels.
Yeah, flex down. And you know what? The same thing for good times, right? Sometimes, how do we flex up? How do we get the best talent when times are good? I mean, that was really the scenario people had been planning for before. And I think we got sloppy, right? A lot of business owners didn't think about that other side. I mean, if you look at the stock market, a lot of people were saying it's asymmetrical risk. The upside chances are low anyway, even if things were good. And we were due for some sort of correction, although no one anticipated anything this awful.
So let me ask you that then. As we're going through the crisis, what are some of the questions that a construction executive or a team of construction executives should be asking themselves as perhaps they're beginning to get their heads up a little bit and look for opportunities? What kind of opportunities should they be looking for?
When you come out of this, it's going to be about customer loyalty and relationships and employee relationships, right? So there's a lot of tough decisions now about furloughs, layoffs, but how do you keep your employees loyal to you so they'll come back after these times? Or how do you keep them? What sacrifices are you willing to make to keep them so you truly become the employer of choice? Same thing on the customer side of things. My experience with contracting firms is some of them don't have the integrity that they need to have. They'll shift crews, they'll be late, they'll come up with new ways to charge new money. I don't think this is the time to do that. Those firms that emerge as having integrity, that's going to be worth gold. And so I talk about that. I talk about how can you help your customers through this? It's a whole chain of people going through this. So what do they need? There's a lot of goodwill that can be built during this time. Same thing in the community, right? We're seeing a lot of companies on television now, right now, being featured for switching their core business to something that's helping out now. Not everyone can do that, but everyone can make some sort of contribution to the community, not for pure PR reasons, but substantive things that we can all do. And so I think those are the things to be thinking about in addition to the usual running a business. The other side, again, goes back to knowing your business model, right? In any revenue model, for instance, there are certain levers that grow a business, right? How do you get more leads? How do you convert more leads? How do you keep your leads? How do you keep customers loyal? What's the average price per job? That sort of thing. All of those are things you got to look at. I think a lot of us got sloppy and took things for granted. It's a nice time to look at every element of the business right now and get it right, right? What do they say? The rising tide lifts all boats. And then when the tide goes down, you see all the shipwrecks. And well, look, a lot of businesses are seeing the truth about some of their weaknesses. This is a great time to look at those honestly and shore them up.
So it's interesting you say about the building goodwill. One of my clients, Tykert Construction, they recently donated a whole array of masks and things like that to a local hospital, and so they were able to source some from one of their suppliers and donate them. And I mean, it's just a wonderful thing to see construction companies stepping up in those specific ways to help out the healthcare providers.
And look at what that does, especially, if they did the substance, if they added a little publicity, maybe made it on the news for that, people are going to remember that particular company, right? Potential employees are going to be interested in going to a place like that because they did something good in the community. That's the kind of stuff. Listen, this is painful, right? What they did took away from other things they could have been doing that would make a profit. And so we're really seeing, they say that integrity and character is what you do during the bad times, right? It's easy to have character during the good times. And so now we're going to see who has character and who doesn't.
So let me ask you this: if as a business owner or a construction company owner or executive, I've got a responsibility and a duty to control myself, obviously, and to rise above the hurly burly and to execute as well as I can in the midst of challenges. What perspective should I be taking on my people as I observe how they react to the crisis, how they respond? Should I be giving them a little more rope or a little more slack in terms of their performance, or should I be perhaps really honing in on those high performers? How should I be viewing my people through a crisis like this?
Yeah, well, here's an exercise to do that I love to do with my clients is I'd like each of you who's listening to think about the best boss you ever had and the worst boss you ever had. And I would ask that same question. What do you think your best boss would do in this situation? The kind of boss you'd go to the mat for. And what do you think the worst boss would do in this situation? So I don't mean to shun the question, but I think that's where you're going to find the answer to that is from your own experience and what you think your best and worst boss would do. I know for me, what matters first is getting results for the customer, satisfying the customer, right? So I'm not going to slack off if it's going to hurt or let employees slack off or lower my standards, right? Step one is quality and excellence. And as you know, there's a way to communicate that by saying, look, these are tough times. We got to focus on keeping you safe. We got to focus on doing what's right for the business, the customer. And I think there's a compassionate, diplomatic way to say it that also builds that relationship. So for me, it really, it's a tricky balance, though. You raise a great question.
What's your perspective on a company's, in a time like this? Let's say I'm strong in terms of my balance sheet, my cash flow. I'm going to get through this regardless of how difficult it might get. But I know that my competitors are going to be struggling a lot more. What is your view on the stronger companies taking advantage of that in terms of sourcing talent and being able to perhaps pick up some new talent from those companies, and maybe even, not trying to sound so harsh or anything, but maybe even trying to jiggle your own roster a little bit and move C and B players up and out, and perhaps take on some more of the A players from your competition?
Why is that harsh? I think of Intel, for instance. Intel used to be famous during downtimes. That's when they were the only company that would buy capacity. They'd buy out the weaker players and they'd get stronger. This is business, right? So yeah, we want to do the right things for our customers, the community, but it's still a business, right? This could be a great time for companies in a strong position to emerge even stronger. There's a lot of opportunities for those, and that's really, the message here today is, for some of us, it's too late for this current crisis. It's the next one we have to think about. How can we get our company in a position so that at the next one, we are the strong player, we are the Intel in the market, and we have the power. Business is business. What was Michael Porter of competitive strategy? His whole thing was 5 forces for a strong strategy. And these forces were things like power over suppliers, power over other, fewer competitors, power over the customer. Business is about building power. So no, there's nothing harsh about that. This, for some organizations, for some companies, is an amazing time. I wouldn't worry. You don't want to do anything that's unethical, but in business, there are things that we do on this playing field.
That's excellent. Let me ask you another question here. During these times of pressure and crisis, obviously executives are running meetings with their teams, and some of those meetings are high pressure. They're making big decisions, all those kinds of things. What's some advice you can give to an executive or a leader in light of preparing for those meetings, not so much the data and the figures, but perhaps their own mindset? What mindset should they have as they go into those meetings in order to run them effectively?
Well, first of all, they should have a coach, right? I've worked with a lot of executives, and when they go into a meeting, they don't even know what their outcome is that they want. They don't know how to measure success. And they come in as like anger energy or stress energy or fear energy. You've seen people, their hands are all over. They're just saying stuff. And the people listening, they might feel fearful. They might feel stressed out, but they don't know what the heck this person was trying to achieve. With a coach and a good coaching process, it's really easy to role play and just feel more comfortable. I've done this with hundreds of executives. I know you've done it too. And it's a great thing to do, right? We're going to start and say, what goal do you want? Is it a clear goal? Who do you want to influence? What do you want them to do, say, think, feel by the end? And then you say, so what's in it for them, right? Let's think about them. Too many executives, it's here's what I want you to do because it's about me and I want you to do it, instead of, look, I know let me tie what I want to what you want. And so we could figure out and think strategically about what the people in the meeting need and want and help them get it too. Then we can look at different approaches. We can explore objections that might be raised, or concerns or objections that aren't raised that we have to anticipate, because people will leave the meeting and not get it. And then we can say, what's the worst that can happen? What do you have to avoid? What will make you angry? What can make them upset so the meeting goes sideways? And finally, let's role play this. I'll play the role of one of these folks. Tell me what objections to raise. And when I've done this, it's been miraculous. You've done this too. We've worked together on this. Just getting the opening right can take 20 minutes of rehearsal time, and it's so valuable to the executive. They never realized how much they rambled, or how much they didn't even say what they wanted, or how they were talking about one goal when they thought they wanted another. So to get into the right state of mind, you want to think like an athlete, right? An athlete doesn't go to a basketball game and not watch the tapes and not know who they're going to be covering. They plan ahead, they prepare. And so I think the most valuable thing you can do is get a coach to walk you through this process, role play, and then you can improve your impact and effectiveness by magnitudes.
That's interesting, that whole idea of role play. Why do you think role play is so important? Let me just ask you, just let me say the reason why is because sometimes when people are role playing, they feel like they're kind of being fake and they're being like actors or something like that. But just dive into that a little bit in terms of why it's important.
Sure, two things. Well, first of all, the first exercise I often like to do if someone's angry is just let them vent, for 2 minutes. We don't record it, we don't look at it, and just let them say what they really want to say. Like, let's get that out now. And so there's no acting there. And it's awesome. There's two types. There's the type who can vent like you and I can. We'll swear, we'll get up on the table, we'll yell. But there's another type that when they think they're venting, they're actually being quite appropriate and they don't realize it because they don't like to assert. But anyway, here's why this is important. We all have an intention in our mind before we go to a meeting. And then when we get to the meeting, we have a certain effect on people. We have a certain impact. And what we want to do is make sure that those two things are as close as possible as they can be. So here, we're holed up during this whole virus thing. And, there's some interesting interactions at dinner. My kids are frustrated. And sometimes they'll try to influence my wife and I. And I know what their impact is. I mean, I know what their intent is. It's fine. But they want to go play with their friends, but they can't. But the way they come across communicating it, their impact is obnoxious and immature and 15-year-oldish. And I understand. But had they role played, they could make their intent and impact a little bit closer.
I have kids as well, and I tell you, at times like this, they become these master manipulators. I think I can learn more from them than I can from the most learned books on psychology. You know what I'm saying? Let's just keep going on this a little bit. So let's say you prepare well for the meeting. You're in the midst of the meeting. The pressure on a lot of executives right now is you can talk a lot in a meeting, but because of the changing circumstances, there's uncertainties. So what advice do you have for an executive team when they're still faced with uncertainties? They're not sure if the decision they have to make is going to be the correct one. What advice do you have for them going through that decision-making process before the time of action?
This is a very hard time to make decisions because if it was hard before, right, there was never enough information and you had to make quick decisions. It's harder now. The best thing that I ever learned was this. Let's say you have 10 alternatives. I'll tell you the difference between a good leader and a less good leader. The less good leader is going to obsess over all 10 and just obsess and obsess and obsess and try to perfect, what's the perfect thing? The good leader is going to do the following. They're going to say, all right, 5 of these are just bad ideas. Not going to happen. Maybe one's a great idea, but we're not going to invest in it. We're not willing, whatever. They get rid of those 5. There's 5 left. And they're not going to obsess over which one is perfect. They're going to know, look, I don't know. There's too many uncertainties that are happening here. And so they're going to go a little bit with their intuition, knowing that, look, all 5 of these are good. I can only go with 1 or maybe 2. And so they go a little bit more with their gut, knowing that a quick decision about something, one of 5 things that's pretty good is all right. It's kind of like buying a prom dress, I suppose. Not that I've ever had to do that, but here's 5. I imagine it's like this, or a wedding dress. There's 5 good-looking dresses here. You pick one, you go home with it. It fits perfectly fine, right? But you get rid of the 5 that were ugly and weren't going to fit you.
No, that's a good one. That's a good one. So in your experience, what are 2 or 3 characteristics of high-performing leaders in times of crisis that really set them apart from the folks who are just kind of muddling through and hoping for the best?
Yeah. So the first one is they're the last repository of doubt. When everyone else has doubts, or I should say of confidence, of no doubt. When everyone else has doubts, the leader is the one who says, we're going to get through this together. Now, that doesn't mean they're inauthentic. They could say, yeah, these are, they're compassionate, they empathize, they listen. So yeah, these are tough times, but I'm optimistic. I know that we can get through this. So I think that's number one. Number 2, communicate. They're communicating, and communication is tough. We see this now with our government communicating about the virus because, what does everyone want to know? Will I have a job? Will my company succeed? Will I get the virus? Will I die? And when are we going to get through this? Well, no one knows the answer to those. So communication is never going to be perfect, but at least by being there, by being present, that's really important. People want to, and what you don't know, you say, I don't know, but what you do know, you can share. People appreciate good, consistent, honest communication. And then the third thing is to be there. You got to be rolling up your sleeves on the front line, right? We know leaders go first. That goes a long way. I can't stand reading about public officials who sold millions of dollars of stock as soon as they were briefed about this virus and then walk. That to me is the opposite of leadership. That's so disgusting to me. We want leaders who stand by their people. Even if the worst happens, even if you got to shut down the company for a minute or for a month or for a couple of months, you got to be there with these folks, take care of them, Leaders sacrifice first. They go first and they receive the rewards last. I think that's really important here. So those are the three things.
So optimism, clear communication, and then self-sacrifice and commitment.
Yeah, going first. Yeah. And in terms of optimism, it's not so much unfounded optimism. It's being that last resort where people can come to you and you're the rock. You're the one who really says, yeah, we're going to get through this.
So let me ask you another thing. It's interesting. Let's say I'm a middle manager and I'm looking up the chain and there seems to be confusion, a lack of clarity, a lack of direction, a lack of decisiveness. What do I do to show up on a daily basis, be a benefit to those who I report to in light of helping them with their seeming confusion or lack of decisiveness?
There's nothing harder than being a middle manager. I, in fact, stopped coaching middle managers because I just found it to be so, it was heartbreaking because 99% of what middle managers do is cope. They're coping with uncertainty. They're coping with all of the problems at the top, right? If two leaders at the top have a conflict, that ripples throughout the organization. And they don't even realize the extent to which that ripples. And the poor middle manager is the one who has to bear the brunt of that. And so to me, middle managers have it the toughest of anyone. My advice, number one, is cope. You got to learn how to cope. I have a teacher who says, put it in the cloud. You have these thoughts, you have these worries, you have these doubts. You just got to think of them as clouds going by. I mean, it's a little bit like meditation, a little bit like Zen. You got to get really good at that. Take care of yourself, know how to manage your stress, get the sleep. And then, you know what? You have every right to assert appropriately up top. People at the top want to hear it. And even if they don't want to hear it, they want to hear it. I think of it again, like my kids. I'm telling them, you got to do your homework, even if it's online and school, has been canceled. And I know they're hearing it, even if they're not hearing it, if you know what I mean. Sometimes as a middle manager, you got to think of senior leaders. They're no different. They're just regular people. We can imagine them in third grade on the playground doing whatever they were doing too. And, if there's an issue and you're confused, I just go up to them and say, you act dumb so that they're acting smart. Let the leaders appear smart. And I say, geez, I was confused because one of you was saying this, one of you saying this, or I'm not sure what to do. Can you give me some guidance? And their guidance might be just hang in there. Their guidance might be, you're right, thanks. This is what we need. Or they might yell at you, whatever it is. At least you've asked. Good open communication. It goes back to that influence we were talking about. If you don't ask for it, you're not going to get it. It's not acceptable to just fall into resignation, complaining, avoiding, and that sort of thing. If there's an issue and you're concerned about it, there's appropriate ways to raise it. Once again, not to be always promoting coaching, but this is another place where having a sounding board is a great thing because, you don't want to stick your neck out with leadership. How you look, how you come across is important. Again, it's nice to have a sounding board to make sure you're balancing that ego, results, and relationship triangle.
So let me ask you this. What if you're in a situation like I know over here in California right now, there's different kinds of regulations about who can do construction work, who can't do construction work, what kind of spacing you need to have between workers on a job. What if you're in a situation where you see a safety issue or a regulation issue, and yet the upper management is kind of pushing you on the one hand just to keep going and maybe overlook it? What would you do in that kind of situation? What advice would you give to someone who's in that role of middle management, stuck between the upper management and the work in the field?
It's a really hard question, right? Again, it gets to your values, your character. If there's a safety issue that can put someone's life at risk, or whatever you're working on could be unsustainable, you got to think long term about that. That's my advice. Again, it's about character and integrity. And if anything, this is not a bad time to be thinking about calling those things out if you're concerned about them, because the things are going to come back. People are going to need employees, and really good ones, at some point. Having character and integrity, sometimes it's during times like this that is the best time to have it. I will say this. I don't know that I personally could ever be a whistleblower. Things don't end well for whistleblowers. They tend to get assassinated, jailed. There's no great rewards for whistleblowers. So for me, if you see something, it's more about not being dramatic, but just pointing it out and using good informal influence, good conversations to say, look, I see this. Here's 3 reasons why I really feel like we need to address it. And, you keep pushing it. That's my advice. Keep pushing that balance between ego, results, relationships. But listen, if you're working for a company where things are really unsafe, you don't want your name attached to a company like that. So if you have a senior leadership team that's not listening to that kind of stuff, you got to ask yourself, if something really goes wrong here and this company makes it to the papers and now I'm branded as having been there, how's that going to do for my reputation, even if I wasn't the cause of it?
As we wrap up here, obviously we're in the midst of a crisis now, so it's a crisis management time. But if you were sitting down with an executive and you were wanting to help them to lay out the first 6 to 12 months is going to look like after we get out of the crisis, what are some things that executive should be absolutely insisting on with their leadership team? These are the things we're going to work on in order to get ready for the next crisis.
Yeah. So the first thing I do is, how can I get myself off the org chart? Right. So I'm CEO now, I'm owner now, whatever you want to call it. The first thing I'm going to look at is, who do I have to develop so that I can get myself to be replaceable? And then we're going to look at, so how can we get their team, those folks who are backfilling me, to be replaceable? And then how can we get a pipeline of the best talent in so that we can continue this process all the way up, right? So how can we strengthen everything we do? That's number one. Number two, how can I make sure that what I am doing is creating a culture of performance and excellence? What messages do I need to send? Who am I going to stop tolerating? What am I going to stop tolerating? Where do I spend my time so that we're communicating what we're really about, right? So number two is culture. And then number three, what are the financial decisions, the way we run our business, so that the next time this comes around, and comes around every 10 years, there's something like this, we will be in a position of strength, and even stronger than we are now. Or if we're in a position of weakness now, we'll be in a position of strength so that we can take advantage of so many opportunities that are clearly going to open up to those who have cash and those who have a good market reputation. That's my advice.
Excellent. So talent, a culture of performance and excellence, and then what are the financial decisions we need to make to position ourselves for the next one?
Yeah, and specifically talent, so that you are replaceable. How can you get yourself out? Yeah, so you've built an organization where it's not about you, it's about a strong organization. It's very hard to do. Very few can get through the eye of the needle. It really takes a special kind of leader, and someone who's really open to examining how they come across. But if you can do it, that's the key to a business that will last longer than a generation.
Okay, so then I just have to ask you this one question. What is it that a leader can do if they know that they've struggled and struggled and struggled to get themselves off the org chart, to get through the eye of the needle, so to speak? What is it that a leader can do to perhaps become more self-aware, or just to incrementally begin to move towards that place where he or she is in a position to be able to get off the chart eventually?
Yeah, two things. One, you have to understand the impact you're having on others, right? So one way to get self-aware is to ask the people you work with about how you're coming across. What do you do great? What's one thing you can do even better? And what other advice do they have? And again, I do this as an executive coach all the time. I know you do it as well. It's a great exercise to do for people to become aware. And there's other ways to do that through other types of assessments. So that's number one. Number two, there are certain very common beliefs that leaders have that keep them from getting out of their own way, if you will. Things like, I need to be in control. Beliefs like, I can't trust people. Beliefs like, everything has to be perfect. Beliefs like, this is my baby, or only I can do it as well. Or sometimes belief like, I love chaos. I like that feeling of fighting fires. Maybe about 10 or 12 of these. And it's not hard to know what they are. And you can quickly assess whether, most of us have one of these. And I think the business leaders who have gotten through that eye of the needle they don't. They've looked at those and reframed them or dealt with them. And by the way, many of these beliefs come from very early, right? They're defense mechanisms. They're conclusions we drew, who knows when, through something with our parents, something in the schools. And I think the leaders that get through it are able to look at those things and shift them so that they can move forward in new ways.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was talking to one of my clients, and one of their issues was, I like being the hero. They always like to be the one who solved the problems.
Right. Well, how do you get a business to be independent if you have to be the hero? You can't.
Yeah. And so we framed it. It was really interesting. We reframed it so that he was thinking about, I want to teach other people to be the hero instead of I want to be the hero.
Yeah, that's a great example. Great case study.
Yeah, really, really interesting. So, Andrew, just as we wrap up here, can you just give us some places where people can find you, find some of the resources that you have, and how they might be able to get in touch with you if they wanted to?
My primary website is centerforexecutivecoaching.com. My most recent book is Coach, which talks about the skill of coaching and how to bring that to your culture. and create a culture of coaching. I think those are two good places. And honestly, Eric, I'd refer people to you. I mean, we've worked together. You know this industry cold, and anyone who wants a sounding board and wants to get a taste for what the things we've been talking about are all about, I'd send them to you.
Excellent. Well, I appreciate that, Andrew. And, I really value you taking the time to come with me here today and be on the podcast. And I value deeply the relationship that we've built over the years. So thanks for joining us here today.
Same, my pleasure.
And by the way, we will link to all of that stuff, Andrew's website and the book, in the show notes. So check those out there. Thanks a lot, Andrew.
All right. Thanks, Eric. Bye.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Construction Genius. Hope you found that 1% of inspiration to help you in the next few days. If you like the show, please give us a 5-star review on iTunes, share it with other construction leaders who you think would benefit, and always remember that the show is brought to you by Kick-Ass Meetings. I've been working with construction leaders since 2004, teaching them how to run extremely effective problem-solving meetings that gets their people collaborating, taps into their creativity. And to get yourself a free copy of the Kick-Ass Meeting Report, go to www.ericanderton.com/kickassmeetings. Grab yourself that free report, read it, use it in your business. You'll find it extremely useful. And thanks again for listening.